Hi everyone, and thanks for joining our Ed Collab gathering session today. My name is Jill Davidson, and I am a literacy coordinator in Anglophone School District West, which is located in New Brunswick, Canada.
And I'm Melissa Walker, and I'm a literacy learning coach in the same school district.
So today we're going to talk about how using mentor text increases the agency and authenticity in writing workshop. And we're going to talk specifically about taking an inquiry approach to mentor text. We're going to share some work we've done in our district with teachers, and we're going to recommend our mentors, those professional resources that we use to support our work. We're going to start with a quick write self-reflection. So we'll spend a little bit of time with this quotation from NCTE's Professional Knowledge for the Teaching of Writing, and then I'll give you a minute or two to just do some thinking on the page. Often in school, students write only to prove that they did something they were asked to do in order to get credit for it. Or students are taught a single type of writing and are led to believe this type will suffice in all situations. Since writers outside school have many different purposes beyond demonstrating accountability, and they use more diverse genres of writing, it's important that students have experiences within school that teach them how writing differs with purpose, audience, and other elements of the situation. Even within more academic settings like college courses, the characteristics of good writing vary among disciplines. What counts as a successful lab report, for example, differs from a successful history paper, online discussion contribution, essay exam, reflection on service learning, or interpretive statement about a work of art. So I'll give you about a minute to jot some thoughts down. You might want to reflect on how this quotation confirmed or challenged your thinking about writing and writing instruction. You might write from a word or phrase or idea that resonated, or you can write wherever your thinking takes you. We'll call you back in about a minute. Okay, I'm going to invite you to come back, and you can continue to add your thinking to what you started as the session goes on. And of course, that's the beauty of a pre-recorded session. You can stop and jot at any time. So a mentor text is simply any text that a writer can use as a model for their own writing. And in our work and in this presentation, we broadly define text to encompass text beyond just traditional alphabetic print text. And a mentor text can be a full text, so students can explore an op-ed, a TED Talk, a commercial, or it can be an excerpt, and we can have students go back and look closely at the conclusion or the introduction, or maybe a section of dialogue or descriptive writing, a specific text feature, and it can even be a sentence or a line. And we believe that professional writing makes excellent writing teachers, but we'd also encourage you to think about adding teacher-written and student-written text to your collection as well. And when teachers ask us what resource we would recommend to get started using mentor text or to move a practice of using mentor text to the next level, we'd recommend writing with mentors. And I love in this section that we've pulled from it how Marchetti and Odell talk about both the independence and the inspiration that mentor texts bring to the writing workshop. And that's something that you're going to hear throughout this presentation today. We really believe that mentor texts support writers in developing independence, making their own decisions about their process and their product, but it also provides inspiration in the sense that it gives students a new vision for different places that they can take their writing. In inquiry-based learning, students are constructing their knowledge through their experiences and their explorations. And in this quotation from the Canadian Education Association, they specifically name the learning by doing that mirrors the work that scientists do. And we believe that an inquiry approach can work in any content area, including literacy. And specifically, it's a stance that we can take toward mentor texts. And when we look at the list of activities that are often found in inquiry-based learning classrooms, we can see some really direct parallels with the kind of work that we do with mentor texts. So we often begin an inquiry into a text or a collection of text by formulating questions like, how does this text work? What does it say? How does it say it? How can I use this in my own writing? But also looking at answering questions like, what are other people saying about the topic that I'm going to explore in my writing? What are the discourses around it? Or how are other people writing about the topic I'm going to explore? What are the forms and modes they're using? We design an investigation into text when we ask students to answer questions like, what did this op-ed teach me about how I can write an op-ed? Or what did listening to this podcast help me understand about how podcasters incorporate music and sound effects to impact their listeners? We encourage students to identify and collect relevant resources when we invite them to be independent and find their own mentor text by looking at what kind of writing they can find in the world that is similar to the writing they're planning on doing, or what kind of writing is happening on the text they're planning to explore. And we also reflect on the learning process and outcomes throughout the whole writing process. When we ask students to articulate in the process and in the product how the mentor text informed the decisions they made, how it helped them decide about craft moves and process and organizing their piece. So really this inquiry approach to mentor text is about approaching text with a curiosity about how the texts are written and how that can impact us as writers.
What is Writing Workshop? Writing Workshop is a framework for teaching that values student voice and ownership, student choice, building a community of writers, and really values time for students to do the work of writers. In this slide, Samantha Bennett explains that workshop is a structure, routine, ritual, and symbol. So workshop is a structure in that it is a way to structure class that gives students time to do the work of writers. Workshop is a daily routine where everyday teachers know they will have approximately 10 minutes to demonstrate what will be learned, how to show this learning, and then the bulk of the time is spent listening to students to figure out what they know, what they are able to do, and what they might need for tomorrow. Writing Workshop is a ritual that celebrates student thinking and is filled every day with rituals such as time to write, a favorite spot to write in the classroom, writer-to-writer conversations, engaging with mentor texts, digging through writers' notebooks to find ideas, etc. And lastly, it is a system because it must contain all three parts: the mini lesson, the independent work time, and the debrief, share, reflect. And the mini lesson feeds the work time, which feeds the debrief, which feeds the mini lesson the next day. This slide shows the essential components of Writing Workshop, which many of you are familiar with: the mini lesson, the independent work time, the debrief, reflect, share. It might also include, depending on the day, quick writes, the use of mentor text, writer's notebook work, and of course, independent self-selected reading. But in engaging teachers in our school district with learning surrounding Writing Workshop, we felt it was important to start our conversations with the why of Writing Workshop. Why are we investing time learning and talking about this framework? This led us to explore our beliefs about writers and writing that serve for us as the foundation of our work about Writing Workshop. And we're going to talk about a few we feel are directly related to using mentor text to increase agency and authenticity in Writing Workshop. The first belief we feel is important to share is that engaged writers make decisions about topic, audience, purpose, form, and mode. This means that we need to think beyond choice and topic and create an environment where writers have the autonomy to make writerly decisions, such as, what do I want to say? Who needs to hear it? What do I want them to know or be able to do after they have read my work? And what's the best way to communicate my message? Here, Penny Kittle and Kelly Gallagher speak to the disengagement that occurs when students are not provided the opportunity to make writerly decisions. Sharing mentor texts with students that show the many ways authors and creators have addressed these questions support student writers in answering these questions for their own writing. The next belief we want to share is that the process of writing must be valued as much as the product. The first line in this quote from the NCTE Professional Knowledge for the Teachers of Writing states, first, to say that writing is a process, decidedly not to say that it should or can be turned into a formulaic set of steps or reduced to a set of traits. And what this reminds us is there is no one process. Some writers revise and edit as they write, especially when they are writing on a keyboard. Other students need to get their ideas down on paper before they can even think about, say, how they might want to organize their thinking or the wording that might best get their point across to the reader. In helping students recognize there is no one process, we need to model for students our own writing process, which again may vary based on audience and purpose. Have students share their own unique writing processes, and provide opportunities for students to develop their writing process by providing instruction and carving out class time to share different strategies writers use to, say, brainstorm ideas, develop their writing, ways to revise, what writers do when they feel stuck, what digital tools might be helpful, etc. Mentor texts are of great benefit to students in discussing what decisions writers make in the process of writing, why they might have made them, and what impact these decisions have on the reader. In this regard, the authors we bring into our classrooms by using mentor texts also become mentors of the writing process. There are countless interviews, videos, blog posts, etc., in which writers discuss their writing process, including the challenges and successes they encounter when writing. Another belief we feel connects strongly to using mentor text to increase agency and authenticity in the writing workshop is the belief that writing has a relationship with talking and reading. Writing is inexplicably connected to both reading and writing. Unfortunately, in some writing classrooms, the belief is that writing must be a silent and solitary activity. And of course, it may be at certain times, but writing actually thrives in an environment of talk. For some students, talk is a necessary rehearsal for writing, and writer-to-writer conversations are a staple of the writing workshop. Mentor texts support these conversations by providing the opportunity for students to talk about how what they are reading is impacting their writing, and this strengthens aspects of the writing process. The saying, every minute spent reading is also a minute spent learning to write, is one of the essential truths of the workshop model. The final belief we want to discuss today is how authentic writing instruction and assessment reflect real-world writing. Writing is authentic when it reflects the kinds of writing that exist in the world outside of school, as opposed to school genres listed here. Authentic instruction in the writing workshop reflects the belief that we learn to write from other writers, from teachers who write, the writers we share a classroom with, and the writers who visit our classrooms every day through self-selected reading texts, and of course, through mentor texts. Authentic instruction includes not only the kinds of writing that happen, but the many ways writing happens, and this opens up new possibilities for student writers. In order for writing assessment to be authentic, we believe it needs to be assessed by teachers who know writers and know writing. Most people can easily assess, say, grammar and formatting, the technical aspects of writing, but this type of assessment is not the whole story of a writer. If, for example, we cannot recognize how a student used a unique way to organize their writing or intentionally used repetition, we are missing so much of the story the writer is telling us about what they can do as a writer. In this slide, Lynn Dorfman explains, mentor texts are pieces of literature that you, both teacher and student, can return to and read for many different purposes. And we love the idea of using one mentor text for multiple purposes. The same mentor text may be used as a whole or in conjunction with other mentor texts to study apart, such as introductions or conclusions, or a sentence or two may be used to study in a study on craft moves the author makes. This slide also speaks to how mentor text can support risk-taking, which can be scary, especially for students whose writing instruction has been largely formulaic. When students are exposed to writers who take risks, who refuse to follow a formula, it shows them ways in which this can be done and gives them the permission they may be looking for to do the same.
So What You Know by Heart is one of those professional resources that we return to again and again when we're thinking about writing and writing instruction. And one of the habits of mine that has stayed with me since the first time I read this book is what Katie Woodray describes as reading like a teacher of writing. And that means we approach every text we read through the lens of possibility that that text is going to teach us something about writing and can teach our students something about writing. So when we read the world as a teacher of writing, we see everything we read as a mentor text. And Melissa and I have gathered quite a collection of mentor texts from labels and packaging that we've collected over the years from our pantry cupboards and medicine chests. It's true that once you start to see them, you can't unsee them. They're everywhere. And the world really is a mentor text when you start reading as a teacher of writing. So when we talk about how mentor texts support authenticity, we're going to talk about how they bring this to the reading or the writing workshop rather in two ways. One, as authentic models, and two, as demonstrations of authentic process. So like many things in education, the term authenticity means different things to different people. And this definition by Duke, Purcell Gates, Hall, and Tower really resonates with us in our work, both in reading and writing workshop. And they define authentic literacy activities as those that replicate or reflect the reading and writing that people do in their lives outside of a learning to read and write context. And so they remind us that we can check the authenticity of literacy activities by critically looking at the purpose or function and the text themselves. So when it comes to mentor text, we can really gauge the authenticity when we ask ourselves if we're asking students to consume and compose texts that reflect those outside of a learning to read and write context. And when you think about texts like the book report, for instance, it's really challenging sometimes to find those texts outside of that learning context, but there are so many models that really reflect this authenticity when we look at things like book reviews and book blogs and vlogs and booktuber channels. So it's just one way to really ask ourselves if the purpose and function and texts that we're choosing meet this definition of authenticity. My first introduction to mentor text was through Katie Woodray's book, Study Driven. And that text really drove home for me the notion that the first step in planning any writing instruction is gathering examples from the world outside of school to show students the kind of writing you're going to ask them to do. And that if you can't find those models, you may want to reconsider whether it's writing worth doing, whether it's writing worth asking your students to spend your time on. And looking at mentor text and writing in general in this way really helps us save our students the time of spending hours on those school-only genres. Committing to using mentor text as a way to support authenticity in the writing workshop means that we also have to reflect on our beliefs about what writing is. And what we're showing you here is the definition of text that comes from our provincial English language arts curriculum. And you can see that it moves way beyond traditional alphabetic print text. So we're looking at a really broad scope for text in our curriculum. And we've also included this quotation from Troy Hicks and Andy Schoenborn's book, Creating Confident Writers, because it's an important reminder of, again, that inspiration that comes from mentor text. So they remind us that when we expose our students to work by photographers, filmmakers, podcasters, and other media producers, we're helping them expand their vision, their belief about what writing is and what writing can be. So when we think about the kinds of writing we often ask students to do, for example, persuasive writing, we can recognize that persuasive writing exists in a context well beyond the typical letter to the editor or write a letter to the principal asking for more options in the cafeteria. So when we share persuasive writing in the form of political cartoons, ads, marketing materials, unboxing videos, commercials, we can show students a much broader vision and more possibilities for what that kind of writing can be. Another critical aspect of curating a collection of mentor texts to share with our students is the importance of remembering that students need to see themselves reflected in our mentor text just as they need to see themselves represented in our classroom libraries. So when we're making those intentional choices, we have to recognize the impact of our own reading life, our own reading identities on those mentor text collections. So we really need to ask ourselves where we're gathering them from and what decisions that we're making about those collections. So for example, I find a lot of mentor text through social media. So it's my responsibility to check myself to make sure that I'm following people from a wide range who offer a wide range of perspectives and experiences. Otherwise, we run the risk of feeding our students a steady diet of mentor texts that reflect a very narrow point of view or experience. Similarly, if I didn't value graphic novels and comic books as a text, for example, it would be unlikely that I would include those in my collection, and then I'd be limiting my students' vision for what writing could be in that way. So it's really important that in the curation process, we stop and ask ourselves if we're limiting our students' vision for what writing can be to our own personal reading comfort zones. And lastly, we would be remiss in talking about authenticity and authentic models if we didn't address the teacher as model. I think it's really critical that we remember that our writing lives also serve as a mentor text for our students. So when we as teachers are writers and share our writing lives and our processes and our products and our struggles and our celebrations with our students, we're also serving as a model for them. And I think important in that process is being explicit with them about how we use mentor texts, where we find them, and how they've inspired our writing and the decisions that we've made about both the process and the product.
Adding to what Jill said about teachers who are writing models, I would add that teachers who are writing models for their students are better equipped to make the writing process in their classrooms authentic. We already spoke about how there is no one writing process, but we'd like to expand on that idea and talk about flexibility being a key component of an authentic writing process. And we love the questions Anne Elrod Whitney asks here. Do the students writing in our classes have flexibility in process, the flexibility of time, of form, and of content to follow a piece of writing where it leads in an authentic way? If their drafts take them somewhere deeper than they thought, do they have the space to follow the thread and see what they write, or does the assignment make a neat fence around their ideas, keeping their writing as tidy as a manicured lawn, but with wilds unexplored on the other side? And do they have compassionate support when things get difficult? The use of mentor texts in the writing workshop is a key ingredient for success when students are provided flexibility in topics, forms, modes, etc., because it means the teacher isn't actually the only teacher in the classroom. So are all the authors of the mentor text students are using to guide their own writing. This leads us to the discussion of expanding ideas for possibilities for composition. We live in both a print and digital world, and this needs to be reflected and valued in the writing workshop. This quote from the NCTE publication, Understanding and Teaching Writing, states that it is crucial for writers to be exposed to and gain access to a wide range of technologies and tools and learn about the possibilities of composing with them, asking questions such as, what are my students reading and viewing that they might also like to write and create? and what technology might they use to do so opens up the possibility for writing composition in the writing workshop. Mentor texts foster agency for students because they show students that writing teachers exist everywhere. The writers, creators, designers, bloggers they read and view every day can help spark ideas for students and answer the questions about how to write or create something similar or incorporate even certain aspects into their own writing. Mentor texts increase agency for students because they show that there is no need to wait to ask a question. They can search out the answers for themselves when they realize the world is full of mentor texts waiting to be noticed. We want to move on now to showing you how mentor text can be used by exploring a single text, exploring a grouping of texts, and end with a discussion on having students seek out their own mentor texts. In exploring a single mentor text, students might read like a reader and ask questions such as, what does the text say? How are the topic, purpose, and audience connected? What presumption does the writer make about the reader? Whose viewpoint is presented and whose is missing? They might also be asked to read like a writer to inform their work as a writer by thinking about questions such as, how does this text work? What do you notice about a certain aspect of the writing? What decisions has the writer made? And what might I try in my own writing? And this is your invitation to try out using a single mentor text, which in this case is the back of crunchy chickpeas available at Costco, in case you were wondering. And after reading this, you might want to respond to the following question. What does the text say? What presumptions does the writer make about the reader? What decisions has the writer made? Or what might I try in my own writing? We'll give you a couple of minutes to try this now. So that wasn't a lot of time, but this is pre-recorded, so you can press pause if you want to write longer, but we'll keep going here.
So recently, thanks to some Twitter friends, I was introduced to a really fantastic resource called Writer/Designer, a guide to making multimodal projects. And the authors make the point that if we can analyze how a text works, we can apply that understanding to designing or creating our own text. And they offer this method of rhetorical analysis that got me thinking about how we can use questions like this to encourage students to inquire into mentor text more deeply than just looking at those qualities that may be readily visible on the surface, looking at organization, looking at sentence structure, word choice, those sorts of craft moves that we can see easily. But if we encourage students to think deeply about the audience, purpose, and context of a text, and then think about how those factors impacted the decisions that the creator made or the author made, the design choices they made, I think we're really helping students dig more deeply into mentor text and then develop a process of thinking through their own text in the same way. So we're going to give you a little opportunity to give this a try as well. We have a short video for you, and we'll give you a minute or two at the end to answer the question, what design choices does the creator make to support audience, purpose, and context?
My first love
will be basketball.
By the time I was 11,
I was the best player in the city.
In the county.
In the state.
People are gonna remember my name.
I'm gonna make it rain.
I'll pull up from 30.
Thread the needle.
Razzle dazzle.
Set the table.
Splash.
Break the dishes.
I'll take my team to state.
All 4 years with a 4.0.
I'll go D1.
I'll go D1, no problem.
In college, I'll be third team All-American.
First team All-American, 3 times.
2 Final Fours.
3 straight Final Fours. Back to back to back.
I'll be Big East second team.
Big East Player of the Year. Most points in school history, most steals in school history, most free throws, most triple doubles, and minutes played.
And I'll get drafted in the first round. My rookie contract, $4 million.
My rookie contract will be $40,000.
So we'll give you just a minute to maybe answer the question in writing or think about those design choices reflecting audience purpose and context. So again, I know we didn't give you a lot of time to finish that activity, but you can always pause and continue if you wish, or come back to it later. What we're showing you here is a process that we created for teachers in our district to, I guess it started as a conventions inquiry. So in addition to exploring a single text, we can invite students to look at groupings of text and look for patterns that are emerging and then draw conclusions from there. So this originally started as a way to show teachers that they didn't need to make a new and jazzy mini lesson every time they wanted to teach an aspect of conventions or maybe a grammar rule, that you could follow this process, use this routine, and just swap out the example. So we at first envision it with single sentences or short passages from text. But what we soon realized is that this process would work just as easily for excerpts from mentor text. So maybe getting students to look at a collection of introductions from a variety of text, or a series of different kinds of dialogue, for example. And it would also work just as well with a collection of similar mentor texts. For instance, if you were doing a craft study and wanted to show your students a similar craft aspect over a lot of different varieties of text, or if you were doing a genre study, you might pull together a collection of the same type of writing and ask students to examine them in this way. So it really is a simple and flexible 3-step process that begins with asking students to explore the text. And we've suggested it could happen with individuals or in small groups. So if you had students writing different kinds of genres, they may do this individually. But I do think there's a lot of power in using this kind of inquiry model in pairs or small groups so that students can grow their thinking through their talk and as they exchange their ideas of what they've noticed. So in that exploration stage, we would give students guiding questions like, what do you notice about this? What patterns are you seeing emerging, and what conclusions can you draw? Then we move into the synthesis stage where we ask groups to come together and start sharing their noticings and compare what they saw. And at that point, you're trying to gather all of those collective observations and start to suss out what observations can be drawn across the example and what new insights and understandings have come. So this would be a great place to start an anchor chart, for example, that you could use to support students throughout the rest of the study. And then the last question in that phase is asking students to think about how what they've learned or discovered or come to understand in a new way can be used in their own writing, how it can support their writing. And then the last step is to give students an opportunity to apply that new learning right away. And that can happen in their reading if we're showing them, for instance, examples of a punctuation use. You may ask them to find that in their independent reading over the next few days and then come back together and share. Or you may ask them to find their own example of a mentor text that could add to the collection through their own reading. It can also happen in writing if we ask students to create their own example of something we've modeled right away. They can go back into their writer's notebook or a draft they're working on and do some revision to practice out what you've taught. Or they could even just set a goal for how they're going to use this depending on where they are in the writing process. So again, we're going to give you just a quick opportunity to give it a try. These are 3 sentences that I gathered from salt, fat, acid, heat when I noticed some unique use of punctuation, in this case, colons. So we'll just give you a minute to reflect on these questions. What do you know about colons or notice about colons? What patterns do you see emerging? And what conclusions can you make? So now that you've had a chance to try it out, you can probably see how flexible this little process is and how easily you could just swap out different examples or different lengths and type of text, but have students following that same process to guide their inquiry.
Having students seek out their own mentor text can happen in different ways and for different purposes. Sometimes you might ask students to find mentor texts that show a persuasive device being used when engaging in a unit of study of persuasion. Other times you might ask students to bring a text that they are currently obsessed with into the classroom and ask them to uncover what it is that the author, creator does that makes the piece so engaging so that they can add it to their own writing repertoire. And other times you might be engaging in an inquiry study on, say, dashes and asking them to keep on the lookout for the use of dashes in their self-selected independent reading titles to add to a classroom anchor chart of examples. Whatever the reason is for asking students to gather mentor text, the skill itself is of great value. In the words of Allison Marchetti and Rebecca Odell in Writing with Mentors, finding writing mentors and using mentor text isn't only academic life, it's life. The ability to find good writing and identify what makes it effective will carry students through their education and into the world of work. We'd like to end by showing you 2 resources we have created to model for the teachers in our district how they might use mentor text in their writing classrooms. The first is a collection of mentor texts on a platform called Awakelet. It's
We're loading slowly.
There it is. And This resource is divided into the forms of writing. You can see those listed on the left-hand side that are outlined on our provincial writing standards. In each form, for example, say memoir, what we try to include are a variety of ways memoirs can be written, for example, through songs, through graphic, through print, through video, etc. And also a variety of ways these can be organized. At the top where Jill is now, you'll see there's a hybrid section because our provincial standards also recognize that combining two or more forms is a very powerful tool that we want writers to use, our student writers to be using, because that's what writers are doing in the world outside of school. And our standards also recognize that writing is an ever-evolving thing that lives in our world. So that's a place where we can put new types of writing that aren't formally outlined in our standards. The second resource comes from the Craft Studio section of our blog, marginnotes.ca. These posts all follow the same format. You can see here, Jill actually wrote this one on an article called "The Queen's Gambit is a Sports Drama." And we always start with a little summary, what was I reading? And then we move into what moves I noticed the writer making. And then the possibilities from these excerpts for the writers in our classrooms. This section models for teachers how to mine their reading lives for craft moves, and as well as is a bank of mentor texts that they can use when teaching craft moves in their writing workshop classes.
So we're going to close out our session today with a little recap of our writing teacher mentors. These are some of the resources that we rely on in our work and that we highly recommend to teachers who are wanting to explore writer's workshop generally and mentor text specifically. So we have Writing with Mentors, that workshop book, What You Know by Heart by Katie Wood-Ray, Study Driven, Creating Confident Writers, Cultivating Genius, Game Changer, and Writer/Designer. So if you'd like to continue this conversation with us, you can connect with us on Twitter as Shelfie Talk or Margin Notes ASDW. You can find our blog, marginnotes.ca, and that's where you'll find the Craft Studio archives that Melissa just shared with you. And you can also find our growing collection of mentor text organized by the forms found in our local curriculum at wakelet.com/Margin Notes ASDW. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.